Hello and welcome back to the Pondering Papaya podcast for our preview episode of the Japanese Grand Prix. Joining me on today's show is F1 content creator LawVS and FormulaNerds journalist Abby Bathurst. But before we get into that, let me tell you about your chance to win some McLaren merch. Pondering Papaya is giving you a chance to win a 2024 Lando Norris baseball cap so you can watch along with the races in style. As for how you win, keep listening to this episode for a question and also where to send your answers. But in the meantime, let's get on with the show. So join me now, as promised, is Abby and Lawrence. First of all, thank you both for joining me. How are we feeling ahead of Suzuka? It's a very exciting track. It's one of the driver's favourites. I must peel away the curtain a little bit and say, Lawrence, you specifically requested to be on this preview. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you first to basically give us a love letter to Suzuka, sort of why it's one of your favourite tracks.
Oh, well, Suzuka, it's just one of those tracks where there's a lot of Formula One history attached to it. And it's just one of those places where it just feels so satisfying to just explore and just see how it's all evolved, and yet it hasn't. It's one of those tracks that it's pretty much still the same as it was when it arrived back in the 80s. And I don't think there's a driver on the grid that says, nah, mate, Suzuka's horrible. Nobody hates it. Some people might go like, it's not one of my favorites or anything, but they always respect it. And it's one of my favourite circuits as well, because going back to the days of Jeff Cramman's Grand Prix 4, that game where you just reenact the 2001 season, it was always so good to just nail that first corner. And
yeah, you're right. I think Vettel's quote is probably the one I remember the most. He said it's like been designed by the gods, didn't he, in his last race there. And I think if we ever see a Vettel comeback, I guarantee it'll be for Suzuka. Abby, what about you? What's your thoughts on the track?
I do really like Suzuka. It's not my favourite. Sao Paulo is my favourite. But Suzuka, it always provides good racing, and it is a fan favourite. It is a driver favourite for McLaren, Lando, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I'm really looking forward to this weekend, especially following Ferrari's success in Australia. I feel like I have high hopes, but I don't want to get them too high, just in case.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to bring that up. Like, I don't know about you, but we're always talking about how this season's so busy, so many races. But I feel like every time there's a 2-week break, it feels like we haven't been racing for ages. So even Australia seems like it was a long time ago now. So yeah, I'll give you a brief rundown of the track. It's 5.8 kilometers, 18 turns, 53 laps, depending on safety cars and red flags, etc. Lap record held by Lewis Hamilton with a 1:30.983. But specifically about McLaren, like Abby brought up, it's a very good track for them. And last year in particular was one of their best results. It was P2 for Lando, P3 for Oscar, his first podium of his F1 career. And yeah, just a great circuit for them. And also, it was also the scene where Red Bull won their, I forgot the number, their latest constructors title for Red Bull due to Verstappen's win. Obviously, it's earlier in the year this time around. I think that was part of F1's efforts to sort of regionalise the calendar a little bit more. But if we go into McLaren, really, sort of like Abby brought up, like Ferrari and Red Bull are quite clearly the two standout teams so far. And I think that's something that I've been saying in pretty much every episode we've done this so far. But obviously, we've had a few weeks break now. Lawrence, where do you think McLaren are going to be coming into this circuit? Because in theory, it should be one that sort of suits their car's strengths, really.
yes, I was looking at a stat from the Australian Grand Prix from, I think, Formula Data Analysis. And they were looking at statistics saying that actually McLaren at Albert Park were a lot closer than they even expected, as in maybe only about a tenth of a lap slower ultimately to Ferrari. And that makes me go, ooh, but quite frankly, this season for McLaren, it's been the best that they've had in like 3 years. The fact that McLaren are currently P3 when last year we were a distant 5th and lucky to have scored any points. Australia being the absolute boon. And of course, you're right, with the previous result of 2nd and 3rd, the double podium. And let's not forget the kissing trophy. The one that, the one they encourage saying, kiss the trophy, and it lights up in the national colours. So they got to join Max with that weird festivity, but okay. But in terms of the results, I think it would be unfair to say McLaren don't have a chance at being in the top 5. I do think that Lando has a shot at the podium, but I feel like that Checo is probably going to be up there in the mix with Charles and Max. So I feel like it's probably going to be solid point scoring, but I think it may be just like a fourth or sixth. But cementing McLaren definitely as the third best, and probably they'll really get a good advantage in the Suzuka S's. Just all the high speed corners, basically. 130R. That's McLaren are just going to be bossing that. I wouldn't be surprised if they're the fastest in the speed traps there.
Yeah, you're exactly right to point that out. That I mean, if McLaren could have designed a few corners to suit their car, it would have been those. Like Suzuka does have a lot of their perfect corners, and hopefully they'll start to make the most of it. Abby, what about you? What are your thoughts going into this race? Sort of who are you crowning as not the winner, obviously, because we've still got a race to go. But who's your favourite? Maybe away from Red Bull because it's a bit too obvious to say that. But where's McLaren in your pecking order?
I think similar to Lawrence, I think McLaren are definitely the third best team, obviously. In Melbourne, Mercedes had a lot of issues, a double DNF, Russell crashed, Hamilton had a power unit failure, and McLaren are a customer team of Mercedes, and Mercedes have admitted they do not know why there was that failure, so that is casting some doubt over it. But like you guys have said, Lando and Oscar have a strong record here, especially from last year. And with it now being the fourth round of the season as opposed to the 16th round of the season in 2023, I feel like it gives a good barometer as to how teams have done over the winter because it is close together. There haven't been really any major updates apart from their designing 2024 cars. So I feel like it's going to be a strong circuit for McLaren. I think Lando could be on the podium more so than Oscar, but definitely in the top 5, scoring some good points, and definitely ahead of Mercedes, I think, for me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a good point that you made about Mercedes. Like, if this was Mercedes podcast, I mean, I noticed that we're all quite optimistic about McLaren's chances. If this was Mercedes podcast, it'd be the exact opposite. I think Total Wolff cancelled his holiday. He's going to be in Suzuka. That's sort of how bad it's got, where the big boss is saying, "No, I've got to come in." But yeah, we'll ignore them because I think you're both right. There's sort of a distant P4 as it stands. One thing I want to touch on, because obviously there's been a lot of McLaren news this week. Like, we're recording this on Wednesday evening, so we haven't had the media day yet. But obviously, I imagine one of the big topics is going to be about David Sanchez leaving. Like, if you didn't hear it, we did a special episode which you can find in your feed. But basically, the ex-Ferrari engineer joins McLaren, leaves after 3 months. Can I get your guys sort of take it? Like, Lawrence, what did you make of that? Because in our podcast, we were sort of debating that maybe there's some bad blood behind it, or there's been a few arguments. So, sort of, what was your reading of that?
Well, I would certainly think that my first reaction was like, oh, okay. I did not see that coming. And it just made my main question was, why though? It could be down one of two ways. I've not really had much time to process it. I really need to make a video about that myself. But basically, this could be either one of two things. Either because this appointment of David Sanchez, return to McLaren, was done in February of last year, when McLaren were reeling from the fact that they're going, oh, we are going to be bad to begin with, so this is exactly what we need. But now, I reckon that since the introduction of Rob Marshall as the acquisition from Red Bull, and now he's been promoted to chief designer, and someone stepped in for his engineering technical director role, I feel like maybe David Sanchez's role was no longer required. But we don't know the facts. But after 3 months? Really? That's quick. And there doesn't really seem to be any other job for David or anything like that. He can't go back to Ferrari. He's done his gardening leave. So he's just going to be twiddling his thumbs now, waiting for somebody to pick him up. And probably.
Sorry,
no, that's all right. No worries. But I feel like somebody will pick him up, and probably I wouldn't be surprised if Alpine pick him up, because I feel like that David Sanchez is part of that technical structuring that Alpine's going through right now. They're basically looking at the same timeline. They found fundamental issues in December of last year, and now they're doing the 3-prong approach that McLaren are doing. So they're thinking, oh, we've got the guy who's part of that, so let's pick him up. But definitely a surprise move, and I don't know what to make of it. I don't know whether this is because McLaren are they're doing so well that they don't need him anymore, or there's been a clash of personalities, and we're starting to see that maybe Andrea Stella isn't all sunshine and rainbows.
I mean, yeah, that's a great point you make. Like, I think everyone sort of sees Andrew still as this happy guy, but I'm sure when times are tough, it is a bit more difficult. Like I said, recording Wednesday, so hopefully we'll have a bit more meat on the bones come Thursday evening. Andrew Stella might explain sort of what's going on. But since we recorded that episode, there's been another quite high-profile departure, like Emmanuel Pirro, who was basically the head of the McLaren's driver development program. Again, another guy who hadn't been there overly that much long. He'd been there about a year, which obviously looks a long time now compared to David Sanchez. But I mean, what do you make of that? Like, his statement was an interesting one. I don't know about you, but reading it, it seemed like it was more his decision. Maybe, I don't know. There was less tension, I felt, than the one about David Sanchez leaving.
Yeah, definitely. I got that vibe too. And it is strange because it was only like overhauled last year, McLaren's development driver program. And they have some big names, obviously Gabriel Bortoletto, Pato Award, Bianca Bustamante, just to name a few. And now Emmanuel Pirro has decided to leave, and it's going to be Stephanie Carlin, I believe, who is stepping up, who's the current F1 Business Operations Director for McLaren, which I think is a great step for her. But it is weird that there's so much movement within McLaren with people leaving this early on in the season. And it does beg the question as to why. But I do think there is a clear difference between Sanchez's departure and Pirro's departure. That's the feeling I'm getting from the McLaren camp at the moment.
And I think you're right to point out, like, sort of, I think other than Red Bull, maybe, and possibly Ferrari as well, like McLaren have got one of the busiest driver academies. They've got a load of drivers, they've got a load of series, like, and I think this guy was sort of seen as a good person to have in charge, really. Like, Lawrence, I want to put it to you. Do you think, I mean, this is very much tinfoil hat kind of conspiracy theory territory, but do you think the cost cap is maybe behind this? Like, are they getting to a point where they've got, like we said, they had a technical chief and they split his job into 3 different parts. And like, obviously, we all think that's really good, but the financial people might be like, well, you've now given us 3 lots of wages we have to pay. Am I reading too much of it? Do you think that could possibly be an answer behind this?
Well, I don't really have a tinfoil hat, but I have a McLaren bubble hat, and will that suffice?
That'll do.
But basically, I don't think the cost cap's that much of an issue here, because I feel like the cost cap's been actually quite good in streamlining McLaren's operations, in being able to get it down to the bare bones. They think about the wind tunnel. They've reinvented themselves over the last couple of years to be quite stealthy and agile. Their upgrade program is probably one of the most successful upgrade packages and campaigns of 2023 that any F1 teams had. The fact that every single time the upgrades have worked. So I feel like it's been an advantage. And in terms of funding, McLaren, in terms of the overall company, has been acquired now by the country of Bahrain, basically. So they're not strapped up for cash. But I mean, that's a good point, though, in terms of we don't know the facts about why Sanchez has left. We don't know whether it's just a misalignment, as Stella said in the statement, that maybe they just didn't see eye to eye with something, or there was a clash of vision, or whether it was just simply that, sorry, mate, we don't really need that department anymore, because Stella's taking on the role which he had been doing whilst Sanchez was on gardening leave. So he's just basically going back to what he'd been doing for about the last 9 months out of 12. So I don't feel like the cost cap's been about it, essentially, because if Rob Marshall has been promoted to chief designer, that probably would come with a pay rise as well. Because essentially now the chief designer of McLaren is that senior engineer of Red Bull. And sure, he was only one cog in the Red Bull machine, but it'd probably be one of the fundamental people that reported to Adrian Newey, certainly from the engineering prospect, because aerodynamicists and engineers, they got to work together to try and make the dream happen. So they'd be working with Peter Pompidou, the designer of aerodynamics as well. So yeah, I feel like it's just a rearranging that McLaren, they've been successful. They don't need to do the 3-prong approach anymore. Or maybe they just need to do it with different people. You're absolutely right, mate. That we need to get more about this from the media day.
Hello there, listeners. Sam here, interrupting just a few brief moments to tell you how you can win a Lando Norris 2024 baseball cap. To begin with a chance of winning, all you need to do is answer the following question. What year and what race did Lando Norris score his first F1 podium? If you think you know the answer, email inbox@ponderingpapaya.com. That's inbox@ponderingpapaya.com, including your name and where we should send the cap should you win. The competition is open to everybody and we're going to close it at the end of April, so get your answers in now. Now let's get back to the show. Let's switch folks back to Suzuka, and I think you sort of gave me a seamless link there. We'll talk about Rob Marshall, his work in the Red Bull, because one of the big stories, perhaps away from McLaren going into this race, is the so-called updated RB20, whatever you want to call it, like the zero pod, no side pods, whatever it's going to be. But there's a lot of talk heading into this race that we're about to see pretty much a wildly different RB20. And like that seems like a weird thing to say because we went into the season with a completely different RB20. But now there's reports that it was always their plan to sort of wait for a colder track and sort of wait for the likes of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia to go out the way before releasing a car that's going to perhaps look very similar to a Mercedes. Like, Abby, sort of it's hard for you to predict what's going to happen because you don't work in Red Bull, but like, what do you think the reaction would be if they came out with a car that looked almost exactly like, not exactly, but very similar to what Mercedes' cursed cars the last few years look like? Like, is that the ultimate mic drop moment?
I feel like it is because Mercedes were so determined to make that concept work and they were really trying and it just didn't come into fruition for them. And then coming into this year, they thought they'd made some improvements. Red Bull come in and go, no, you know what, mate? We're actually going to use the design that you used last year and we're going to prove to you that it can be done right and it is going to work. And we've already seen them adopt the engine cover that Mercedes used last year. And now, the zero pod concept. And it's to utilize the compact side pod radiator inlets for it. And I'm really excited. As a Mercedes fan, I don't want it to work because I'd like to think Mercedes had the right knowledge and tried their best. And it just wasn't a great concept. But on the other hand, it would be great to see Red Bull utilize that. Obviously, Adrian Newey, you can't really go against Adrian Newey. He is a formidable and incredible designer. I think it would just be really interesting. I think Verstappen said he feels good and confident in the car, but he hasn't said anything specific or particular about the zero pod. So it will be intriguing to see how it performs on track and what Checo says as well.
Yeah, I mean, Toto Wolff's a man with a full head of hair, but I'm pretty sure he'd be tearing that out if he sees a quick RB20 that looks a lot like his Mercedes cars. That caused him a lot of stress over the last 2 years. Like, Lawrence, what's your take on Red Bull? Like, are they going to win by a mile again? Are they going to be another step ahead than everyone else?
I mean, one thing I absolutely love from all of this is when Max Verstappen's really coy when he's asked these things. Like, he was asked, are you bringing the zero pods? What are the side pods like? And he's just like, maybe. It's the same color. We'll see. Ooh. Okay. Max is just playing in the media, and I'm like, oh, that's playful. Just watch them just bring a floor tweak or something like that. They could be just playing this up and be just like, nah, we won't bring it here. We'll bring it some other time. We don't need to. We'll just bring something for the floor, something mundane. Or then again, they could be completely surprising us. And then all I can say is that somewhere out there, Mike Elliott and his team are looking and going, what? We had something. Because Adrian Newey took a look at it and went, I could do that. And it's just, there's so many instances of Adrian Newey just looking at those zero pods and just going like, what are you? I need to know. It's just like, I need to know what you are. Take it out to dinner. Treat it to a movie. Get acquainted for it and then do it better, essentially. It's absolutely right. And Abby, you're absolutely right that I want Mercedes in a way, the aerodynamicists that worked hard on it to prove that it did work, but also it is really a blow that they actually might have had it. But then again, the W15, it's a new concept change, and Allison has talked about that temperature changes can make all the difference. So I feel like Mercedes will get it eventually, but they're going down their own path now. But with Red Bull, I just feel like they're probably interested with Ferrari's progress. But I feel like now they might not bring such a big upgrade now after all, because what if there's a problem with it, or it doesn't work as intended, and then Ferrari turn out to be really good, and therefore more traction's had, and who knows, if Charles Leclerc wins, Max Verstappen comes second, who's going to be topping the championship? Charles Leclerc. That's it's a bit like, maybe we'll wait a couple of races or something. Maybe wait for Imola or something where it's likely to rain.
God, even you saying that Charles Leclerc could top the championship, that's got me going like, how on earth has that happened? Like, I mean, he's pretty much not been a guy in the limelight, really, has he? Like, I mean, Lawrence makes a good point that I think Ferrari this year are applying a bit more pressure on Red Bull, meaning it's not so easy for them. And like, I think that's one of the great shames of Australia was we didn't get that chance to see signs v Verstappen, because obviously Verstappen retired very early. Do you think we're going to get more of the same in Suzuka? Do you reckon we're going to get a proper battle, proper ding dong for P1, hopefully?
I would like to think so. I think, like you say, in Melbourne, we saw Sainz overtake Verstappen on lap 2, I think it was. But then obviously Verstappen retired. So then Sainz just stayed in the lead because Checo wasn't quite there that weekend. I think he qualified P3, started P6, finished P5. But I think he'll definitely be stronger in Suzuka, I feel. He'll have Verstappen's back. I would like to see a battle. Probably Red Bull going out in front still, but there might be some changes for the lead, and then we'll just get Max sailing past. But it would be good because I feel like Ferrari have definitely made improvements this year, and they have closed that gap to Red Bull, which is good to see because it does provide more tension on track and off track as well. And especially Sainz, I feel like since obviously he doesn't have a seat for next year, but he has really come into it. Like, I feel like he's stronger than Leclerc almost at times, coming from his surgery as well. But hopefully we'll get a battle. Let's see.
Yeah, we can but hope. Yeah, and I think you're entirely right about Sainz. He's sort of been maybe the standout driver this year. Obviously, Max is right up there, but Sainz has sort of done heroics, probably more than we were expecting from Sainz. I just wanted to update you sort of on where you can expect McLaren upgrades. I mean, there's not going to be a lot for Japan or in China. I think their first real package is going to come for Imola, so not the huge upgrades that we might be expecting anytime soon. But I want to end the podcast talking about the most important subject, and that is liveries. I mean, I'm sure it wouldn't have escaped anyone's attention that McLaren have had their first special livery of the season. And if anyone knows McLaren, they absolutely love a special livery. I mean, I've lost count of how many they had last year, but we've got an early one this year. We've got one for the Japanese Grand Prix. It's made with their long-time sponsor Vuse, which is a vape company. Me and Abby were talking about how it's not so great before the podcast having someone like that, but those two have done a lot of collaboration over the years. I mean, particularly towards the end of the season, I think there's been a few for Singapore, etc., like that. This one is designed, I mean, I'm going to struggle here because it's by a Japanese artist. It's called Miltz, like Miltz, all in capitals. That's probably not how you pronounce it. He probably says it in a completely different way. So I very much apologize for butchering it. It's inspired by another word I'm going to absolutely butcher, Idomoji, which is a traditional Japanese calligraphy. And that's all the hard bit I've done. So basically it's blue and white, is what I can say. What have you guys made of it, Lawrence? I'll come to you. What have you made of the slight tweak? I mean, in terms of McLaren's big liveries, it's not a huge change, but there is a little bit of blue and white thrown onto it.
Well, I would describe it in one word: pleasant. I would say it's a pleasant livery. And what it reminds me is of the traditional Japanese paintings of the waves and the crashing waters. It's very, very, well, it's based on calligraphy, and it's very, very artsy, very tasteful. It's not quite that obvious from a distance, but when you look closer, you go, oh, that looks really nice. And after all people going, finally, we have a McLaren with no blue on it, and like, oh no, the blue's back. But fortunately, it's the dark blue, which works better, I feel, like we got on the MCL 34. Yeah, on the 34. That the kind of the triangular one, which was actually probably one of my favorite of the recent generation. Much better than the MCL 33, where there was basically nothing, and the MCL 32, which was the wrong papaya. But yeah, no, this one looks it looks really nice. It's pleasant. I wouldn't say it's a big standout one, and it's a shame that the theme didn't carry on for the bit of orange around the number. As I'm looking at it right here, it's a bit of a shame that it's been relegated to just where the Views logo is. So it's like, it almost feels like Views is going, look at our wonderful Aeromoji design. Okay, cool. Can we use it anywhere? No, only we get that, because if you look closely, those artistic bits are only around where the logo for Views is. So it's like they get to get the cool art stuff.
I hadn't noticed
but
that.
Nowhere else does. So it's their thing.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. You're absolutely right. Yeah, everywhere the Views logo is written, it is blue. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean that is a great bit of detective work right there. Like, it's
No, literally,
sussed out why
that
it's
was just
so limited.
improvised. But now, of course, we got the 2 different shades of blue because DP World decided to be a bit of stick in the muds. Go like, no, we want dark blue.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the coolest part is probably the driver's numbers. Like they look very, like you said. I mean, you described it much better than I did.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't
basic
notice
description.
that bit. Ooh, okay.
Yeah, like you said, like very calligraphy style. I mean, I appreciate this is an audio podcast, and people who are listening can probably look at a picture themselves and decide what they make of it. But Abby, what's your thoughts on it? Sort of both the livery, but also I know you spoke before the podcast, sort of like about having someone like Views and basically a vape company sponsoring McLaren and making these special liveries.
I think for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of vape companies, but I know that sponsorship in sports particularly is key and essential. And like you mentioned earlier, Sam, Views and McLaren do have a long partnership. I think this might be the 4th year that they've been collaborating. But with the livery itself, like Lawrence said, it is a pleasant livery. I actually really like it. I like the style. I think it's a great part by the Driven by Change campaign, trying to promote those global artists. I'm not going to go over the names because Sam, you did a good job and I'll probably butcher them as well. But no, I really like it. And I do like the blue and the white. I think that works really well with the papaya this year. For last year's usual McLaren livery, not any of their special ones, I think I said on the FormulaNerds podcast that it was like a deluxe paint colour chart because there were so many colours on it. And whilst they've added colours for this one, it's quite nice. It's quite calm. But I do feel like as the season goes on and the more special liveries we get, we'll get more drastic changes to the car and a lot more colours. But for now, I think it'll look quite pretty around Suzuka.
I'm just trying to decide what kind of blue it is. I mean, is it Williams blue or is it Alpine blue? I think it's more Williams blue. It's more of a dark blue, isn't it? It's, that's how I'm going to describe it going forward. But,
considering that half the grid, I would say actually it's a Williams blue. Because Williams blue, I would describe the Williams dapper, very smart and dapper. So I would describe that as a royal blue almost. So, you know,
I think you've got a new career. Just
wait for a 10-minute video from James Fowles describing
colours.
Just wait for the 10-minute video about James Fowles explaining about what this colour means to Williams. Because he'll go into painstaking detail about why they chose this big thing. To be openly transparent.
I mean, as long as it's on 2 cars this weekend, I'm sure he'll be pleased. That about does it today. I mean, if I'm going to end it, let's get some predictions in because everyone likes predictions. What's your podium? What's the order? Sort of where are we going from here? So, Abby, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask the tricky question. Give me your podium.
Verstappen, Sainz, Checo.
Lawrence, what about you?
I'm saying Verstappen by over 20 seconds. He's driving angry, and I'll say Charles, then Checo.
Very cool. I like it. So yeah, we're pretty much agree. I think you're both right. Red Bull and Ferrari still look a step ahead. So yeah, I think I would agree that Verstappen's going to win it. I'm going to put Sainz second, and then Perez P3 as well. So I think I'm very much in agreement there. But yeah, we'll be back on Sunday with an episode to basically recap, hopefully a podium, a win maybe for McLaren, he says, with fingers crossed. But yeah, my thanks goes to both of you for joining in this evening. And yeah, I'm sure we'll speak to you again later in the season.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
My thanks go to Lawrence and Abby for joining me today. My thanks go to you for listening along. We'll be back on Sunday for a full recap of the race in Suzuka. But in the meantime, make sure you enter our competition and follow us on socials at Pondering Papaya. If you also have a question for the show, email inbox@ponderingpapaya.com and we'll read out the best ones on the show.